A or B?
What makes economics fascinating is that economics is the study of humanity.
Left or right?
Money is putting manners on megalomaniacs.
Yes or no?
The beautiful thing about money, it's entirely made up. It doesn't exist.
Welcome to The Art of Deciding with Bruce Whitfield.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Deciding, the podcast where we talk to people about the decisions they've made in their lives, like writing a bestseller to get themselves out of a redundancy crisis, changing the face of online beauty tech with a new startup, or making sure they have the winning hand in a game of poker. The idea is that we discover things that will help us make better decisions. And there is something that we all have to make decisions about at some point.
I'd spent about 30 years of my life, really, when I narrowed it all down, trying to explain the relationship between money and us.
David McWilliams is a man who has spent his life thinking about money in one form or another. He's been a central banker, an investment banker, and is now a writer, a journalist, a teacher, and a broadcaster, all with a focus on finance and economics. This wealth of experience has given him particular insight into the fact that money and decisions around money is at the heart of all our lives. And that wasn't the only conclusion he came to.
Could it be that economists don't really understand money? For example, if you get work done in your house, right? Let's say you've a plumber comes in, and the plumber can explain to you how the water goes through the pipes, and when you turn on this tap, how it'll move around, and you switch the immersion on, it'll get hot. But if you sat that same plumber after a day's work down in the pub, and you said to that plumber, why do you think water is essential for life? I'm sure that plumber would be very, very hard-pressed in giving you the answer. And I think economists are the same. They use big words, lots of terms, lots of jargon, but the essence of what money does to the average person, what it does to us, how it changes us, how it's been part of our lives, how we think about it, how we deploy it, how it deploys us. Do we really understand it? Do they really understand it? And I came to the conclusion, no. So they can tell you, if you pull this lever, how much money goes around, the rate of interest, the rate of inflation, the rate of exchange, the money supply. So the mechanics of how the money gets around the system, the plumbing. But when you say to an economist, what does money do to us? They reach for a blank.
So, David is on a mission to explain some of that essence, and his latest attempt comes in the form of his book, Money, A Story of Humanity, which is based on a very simple premise.
What makes economics fascinating is that economics is the study of humanity. It's not the study of mathematics, it's not the study of equations, it's not the study of statistics, it's the study of us. So once you put the human being at the center of everything, all your models break down because the human being is at his essence an unpredictable creature, right? I think what happened maybe in the 1940s is that in the 19th century, the elixir of economics was actually biology. And then sometime in the 20th century, when physics became the science du jour of the 20th century with Einstein, the global superstar, nuclear power, all that sort of stuff, the men in the white coats, economists, academic economists got kind of jealous. They suffer from physics envy. And they tried to make mathematical what can't be made mathematical, which is the behaviour of human beings. Which is why, for example, the vast majority of economists don't see financial crisis coming. Because in their brain, they have a physics model and not what I would call a biology model, which is much more messy and squidgy and unpredictable and kind of more beautiful in a way, I would say. And therefore, you have to understand that then money, this book I've written, is about this extraordinarily dangerous and beautiful substance
The origins of money, as best we can tell it, go back probably to ancient Mesopotamia, probably 5000
Yeah.
BC, where people get fed up with lugging jars of olive oil to trade for a sheep or a goat or whatever it might be, and say, you know what, I'm going to give you this stick, and this stick symbolizes 5 amphora of olive oil. Are you going to be happy with that? Yes, I'll accept your stick. And we developed this system of trust between us. What is the catalyst? What is that decision that humanity takes? Does it take it in one place and it spreads around the world? Or is it a decision that happens in different parts of the world at different times where we just get fed up with lugging things around and decide we're going to do a trusted method of exchange in sticks or shells, later on commodities like gold and silver?
It's a really good question, because what we see is that money appears once people move from being hunter-gatherers to settled domestic people. So something is happening in relationships where a technology is required to kind of make sense of a new world. And the problems of societies that begin to settle down and are in effect, what I say in the book, mugged by agriculture, because I think agriculture really changed us, was how do we deal with Bruce, who I don't really know, but I know he's a decent skin. He lives down the road. He's got his family. They seem nice, but we don't know them. And then we've got another neighbor, and then we've got other people. And the human brain required a shortcut to allow us to make sense of a more complicated world. A world where, as you said, trust, not kin, not blood, but trust became a commodity in and of itself. And how do we value that notion of trust? And how do we know that Bruce will pay me back if, for example, the ancient Greeks, used the same word for money that the modern Greeks up until 2000 used before the euro, the drachma. And the drachma actually means a handful. So it's a handful of grain, okay? But that's just exchange. But something much more interesting is going on, which is called commerce. And commerce is exchange at scale. And that's what begins the sort of brilliant story of money. That then requires somebody to write down how much does David owe Bruce? And that's where basically writing comes from, right? Writing, the other fascinating human technology. And of course, what else comes from there is counting. And numerals come from there. Then, of course, for commerce and trust, you need a legal system to back up that trust. You start to get courts and laws. Then, of course, you have, coincident with that, or organized religions. So the religion is basically the rules of the game. Who sets the rules? Is it Moses? Is it somebody before that? And suddenly what you see is, in a moment of extraordinary change in Mesopotamia, also in Middle America, and in Asia, of course, in China, where you see concentrated numbers of humans in domesticated situations, you also see this foundational technology, money. And that really fascinated me, Bruce. These sort of ideas took a while to germinate, but once they start coming together, it begins to form this very interesting, logical, rhythmic also look at human endeavor and human progress side by side with innovations in this bizarre but beautiful technology, money.
Look at the world as it is right now. Economics, policy making, money is at the epicenter of probably throughout history, but certainly right now it's a prescient topic, and the decisions that are being taken on our behalf by country heads, by policy makers, those decisions out of our hands. And this is where economics gets weaponized, and where most of us feel on the margins of this social science, if you like. How are those decisions playing out at the moment? What's your reading of the big picture in terms of policy making, decision making that is happening at the moment?
Well, I think obviously the epicenter of everything is Washington for most of us. Even if we live on the other side of the pond, we're very far away, etc. I think the interesting thing is money is putting manners on megalomaniacs, which is quite an interesting idea, right? Which is that what's actually putting manners on the megalomaniac of Donald Trump is money. Money is rejecting him. It's not politics. You know, the official opposition against the Republican Party in the United States is not the Democratic Party, It's the money market. And you can depend on money to flee away from idiots, or Egypts, as we say in Ireland, right? And to go towards sensible people as a general rule. So one thing that interests me is that the relentless interrogation of humanity by money is ongoing. And we're seeing this with Donald Trump at the moment. As to the sort of more hydraulic notion of whether the Americans go into a recession, it looks to me like the leading indicators are all screaming a very rapid slowdown. And that's because economics is what happens inside our ears. Economics is nothing more than a conceptual framework to look to the future. So once you understand that, if that conceptual framework of the future is impinged or upended or imperiled by silliness that we all know is silly, then surprise, surprise, people get freaked out. And when people get freaked out, they retrench. And when they retrench, what they do is they will usually display their displeasure or their retrenchment in not deploying money. So if we look at the entire cycle of interaction of politics, geopolitics, fiscal policy, tariffs, trade policy, what we see is the most clear and transparent indicator of whether things are good or bad, going the right or wrong direction, are the flows of this ephemeral concept called money, because they're not even flows, because the money is entirely fictitious. The beautiful thing about money, it's entirely made up. It doesn't exist.
Let's move away from talking economics and talking to people and our behaviours and our decisions around money, because there is a song, Money Makes the World Go Round, I believe it was called.
Yes.
What is it about money that drives our decisions, that drives human behaviour? Because it is so intrinsic to each and every single aspect of our lives.
I think money animates human endeavour, because the essential promise of money is that you can change your personal circumstances for the better if you acquire this stuff, right? That's the essential promise. Now, that is a very incendiary promise, and it has been over the years, because it throws up all sorts of challenges to political status quo, the political order, etc. But even going back to our friends years ago, the Lydians and the Greeks, the promise of money was personal enrichment, but personal enrichment about giving people an element of sovereignty over their lives. And money is the way we achieve that in most societies. So that's why I think you are wedding an ephemeral notion, which is entirely fictitious and exists only in our brains, called money, with a real yearning to change our own personal circumstances, usually for the better, not only materially, but I think socially as well. If you look over history, we've tried communist nirvanas, we've tried feudal societies, we've tried religious cults. Many societies have tried not to have money, but we've all gone back to it. Why? Because it's the best thing we have at running the place.
What's your reading of the world's most important financial, economic decision maker at the moment?
I think Xi in China, and I think Xi and the Politburo are behaving like leaders of an emerging superpower. America, unfortunately, is behaving like the descending power, the power that was once great and has now got to come to terms with the new world. The United States needs an off-ramp from this particular mess. And I don't think the present characters, the gallery of individuals who are running the shop over there, are of the quality that's really needed, unfortunately.
Money can buy us freedom, or we can become so obsessed about it and so obsessed with it that it has exactly the opposite impact. We become obsessed with accumulating more and more and more, and it can drive desperately negative decisions in our lives. What drives the future then? Clearly, it's money is an absolutely critical factor in the future of human decision making. It's not about peace, it's not about justice, it's not about equality. It's about more. And it's our obsession with being the top of the heap. It's our obsession with being in control. And we measure that with money. How does it play out then in a world that is so in this deep moment of flux?
Well, it's ever been thus, right? What makes humans interesting and distinguishes us from the other animals on the planet is our ability to solve problems. Humans are inveterate problem solvers. And we are problem solvers, but number one, we like to solve problems. But number two, we do that collectively. So money allows collaboration at scale, and that will always be the case. So I prefer to see the world, Bruce, in what I would call big supercycles. And those supercycles can take 4 decades, 3 decades, a long period. You know, you could describe it as a generation or two. So 1945 to around 1980 was one cycle, which was largely driven by managed trade, managed flows of money. It was large government, large trade unions, and a certain social democratic way of looking at the world, high taxes, etc. Then from the 1980s, you get Reagan and Thatcher, the fall of the wall, and that for the last 40 years has given us a different type of society with low inflation, with China coming in, with low interest rates, with increased asset prices, with a bias towards lower government or smaller government, with the biases against trade unions, organised labour, etc. And that phase largely lasted from about 1990, 1985, 1990, around then to now. And now I think the reason we are at the reason the world feels so volatile and fragile is we are at an inflection point of that super cycle. And now we're going into a more nationalistic super cycle, one that definitely is going to have not free movement of people. We're going to have immigration bans and barriers, not the free movement of goods. We're going to have tariffs, not the free movement of capital. We're probably going to have something that could be described as economic nationalism. We're certainly going to have, in Europe, they're going to look for bigger rather than smaller governments to protect us. The United States is going off on its own MAGA journey, and we'll see where it ends. But I think the reason, Bruce, we feel so animated by and confused by what's going on is we are at an inflection point of a super cycle. And that is so much bigger than a business cycle or an economic cycle. It's demographic, it's political, it's social, it's historic. And to get back to our point, gelling the whole thing together is our old friend money.
So, David, I mean, one of the ways in which you can land a very serious and often painful point is using humour to do so. And I notice that you have been, as an economist, as a former central banker, not characteristics normally associated with people able to hold a crowd at a comedy festival, but you've gone there.
Bruce, it's a wild idea that we came up with about 15 years ago. I had done a one-man show in the Abbey, which is our national theatre, because when Ireland went from being rich to being poor, and everyone's like, well, how did that happen in 2 weeks? We thought we were rich and now we're bust. And the director of the Abbey said, look, David, people want to hear theatre. They want to hear somebody stand up on stage and explain the story and tell them. So that was a wonderful opportunity. And an old friend of mine, who was a comedian, stand-up comedian, was at the gig. He said, there's something in this, theatre, proclamation from the stage, using the theatrical space. We haven't seen this before. He was like, comedy, maybe, if I get my guys and you get your guys, and we say to the economists, you cannot speak your own jargon, you have to speak the language of the street. And the only way we can do this is by making this funny, by having comedians as the MCs, as the hosts, not other economists. What you do is you break down all sorts of intellectual, social, cultural barriers because everyone wants to laugh. It's that idea that when you make things funny, then suddenly the audience feels, look, if the funny guy is asking the questions, then I have the permission to ask the questions, because I'm not afraid of sounding dumb, because the funny guy is already playing the fool. So we started, interestingly, in Kilkenny. The festival's called Kilkenomics. We started in 2010. Small, inauspicious, reasonably unambitious. 3 years ago, the Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman came as our keynote. Paul was great, very, very funny. But he said to me, so he said something, David. He said, do you realise something, David? And I said, what? He said, how many tickets do you sell here? And I said, about 11,500. He said, 11,500 tickets over 4 nights in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of November, when it's lashing rain. He said, that is the biggest economics festival in the world. And it's not unlike what you do, Bruce. You're trying to bring a message to people that has been brought in the past, not as a way to elucidate or inform or communicate, but to bully, to intimidate and to subjugate. That's what economics was when I first started it. And my life's project, if there is such a project, is to actually take that economics and bring it to life in whatever way I can. And using comedians is one of those routes that has been very successful.
What's one decision we can all make today to bring freedom in your mind? Related to money or not? It's all related to money.
Okay.
What's one decision?
I think the most important to do is never outsource investment decisions about your life to others. Always realize that you are the most important part of the equation. And you should invest in yourself. And I really feel that. I talk to my kids about this, whatever you want to do, you want to play in a band, doesn't matter, invest in that. Work hard, put your money into it, put your application, put your ability. I really, really believe this, that, the thing that makes us happy, the thing that gets us out in the morning as a decent enough person, radiating a little bit of joy around the place, is the idea of self-fulfillment. Are we doing a good job? Have we arrived at a good point in our lives? Stuff that may seem very ephemeral, but is actually very fundamental. So I always think that, invest in your own education, invest in your kids' education, invest in the environment around your family, spend time with others, right? I think probably, Bruce, you and I are two fellas who are probably not bad at making money, right? But what the commodity that is depleting as we speak, Bruce, is time on this earth. And what people really need from us is time. So I would say that you've got to realize in the battle between money and time always wins. So bias towards that, always.
Economics is the study of humanity, and humans are unpredictable. The science of money, that extraordinarily dangerous and beautiful substance, is more biology than physics, more curved lines than straight. And remember, it is an ephemeral notion which exists only in our brains. So never set too much store by it, because in the battle between time and money, time always wins. Plus, economics is also what happens inside our ears. It is a conceptual framework to look to the future, a tool for making decisions perhaps, but not a set of decisions in itself. And never ever, not once, don't ever, outsource investment decisions about your life to others. David McWilliams, Art of Deciding. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Art of Deciding. Go and check out our other episodes for the inside track on more deciders. For instance, if you've been reading about the recent Berkshire Hathaway AGM and the retirement of the world's best investment decision maker, Warren Buffett, then go listen to our edition all about how he makes his decisions and what being in the same room as the great man is really like. You'll find us on all of the major podcast platforms, so please click follow so that you don't miss an episode. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You can find out more about me on brucewhitfield.com. Till the next time, bye-bye.